Hey, what's up guys? This is going to be the second video in the How to Astral Project series that I'm going to put together. This is a continuation off of the last one, the Mind Awake, Body Asleep, using the direct techniques. So if you haven't watched the first one yet, I'd recommend going back and watching it. I'll have a link to it in the description below. But that being said, I think that we left off in the void state. And I wanted to mention something here, something that I believe that I've discovered or come to a conclusion on at least. Long before I ever learned how to achieve this type of state, I read Robert Monroe's Journey Out of the Body book, or Journeys Out of the Body. And he talks about in there that one of the states that you should learn to achieve if you're going to pursue this kind of endeavor is the borderland state that you could hold indefinitely. And that used to just drive me crazy. I used to think about that and think, what is this borderland state that you can hold indefinitely? And what I've come to the conclusion of is I think that this is the void state. And my reasoning behind that is once I learned how to achieve this state, I noticed a very strange change in your mind. Once your body's out of the picture, once it's completely asleep, it's almost as if somebody flips a light switch in my mind, and now suddenly my mind is crystal clear and awake. Where moments before it was kind of groggy and sleepy, and here I am counting backwards from 300 just to keep it busy, to keep it awake. Now it's 100% easy, like super, super easy to keep it awake, absolutely not tired at all. And it's almost as if my mind has said, I put the body to sleep, my work here is done, I'm ready to continue functioning at full capacity. So I haven't heard of other people mentioning that other than possibly if this was what Monroe was referring to. So I'd be interested in hearing if you have the same experience where suddenly your mind clicks awake and becoming or staying in that state indefinitely would be actually relatively easy to do. So anyways, thought that was worth mentioning. But once you're in this void type state, there are two different options that I've found, and there may be more than that. If I miss something, feel free to share your experiences, because I, by all means, don't have all the answers. But I've come across two different types of scenarios that you can move on to from this type of state. The first is if you want to just let the state proceed on its own. This progress it's a slow and controlled type method, bringing on the next steps and sensations. And then the second is a much more, I'm going to force it to happen right now, and a much more jarring and much faster if you can get this to work, but we'll go into the details on that here in a minute. So the first approach, the slow and more controlled type method where you just sort of allow this to happen, all I need to do that is I'm in this void state and I just continue focusing my attention further and further inward as I can move, blocking out the outside world as much as possible to the point where it doesn't even exist. And all I have is just this internal focus, just kind of becoming part of this void. And as you do that, a few things for me start to happen. I start to get these energy type rushes, and these start at the base of my spine, and they move up through my head, and they're particularly noticeable when they go through my head. It's a strange sensation, unlike anything else, but it basically just feels like a burst of energy just going through your head, basically from the back of my head forward. And when these start, they're almost imperceptible. They're very, very light, and if you can ignore them in just the right way, and now this is similar to what I talked about in the vibrational video that I made, where at this point, this is a very delicate type state, and even paying too much attention to any of this seems to wreck it. It's almost like I mentioned before, like you have to view it through your peripheral vision, or you have to pretend that you're indifferent to all of it. You absolutely have you don't care one way or the other whether this proceeds. So you just kind of notice it with a mild curiosity, and you just let it proceed. As soon as you start showing any sort of excitement or fear or emotion, or change your breathing pattern, or any of this, these energetic waves or these rushes just tend to just stop. So if you can ignore them in just the right way, these rushes become from almost imperceptible to gaining in strength and intensity, and at some point they actually become audible. So for me, this sounds like a pulsating static. As soon as I'm able to hear these, and again, the sound starts out soft and slowly starts building as well. It'll sound like psst, psst, psst. So it'll start out like that, and it starts out soft, and it gets louder. And as it gets louder, it also gains speed, and so it turns into a psh, 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 psh. And there's one point where the rushes get so fast, and the pulsing static in my head gains such a volume and such a speed that it's other people have referred to it as like a train engine running through your head or a jet engine roaring in your ears, and it's incredible that nobody else can hear these sounds. Obviously, you're not hearing them with your physical ears, but it's a very, very physical auditory type sensation. So the moment that turns into this jet engine roar in your head, the energetic rushes stop, at least for me, and that is when this big burst of vibrational energy hits my lower spine and starts working its way through my body. And so it all seems to happen at the same time. That burst, the pulsating static into the roar, the vibrations hit my lower spine, and at first the vibrations are very rough, very jagged feeling. Um, and then again, if you can continue to ignore these, there actually becomes a point. There comes a point where it's almost as if the only analogy I can think of is you're going up a hill. So I've mentioned this is a delicate state that can be wrecked at any time, and that is why you're going up this hill. And there comes a point where you get to the top of this hill, and these vibrations become so strong, and these vibrations start to gain in frequency, and the noise in your head starts to go up in pitch and turn into more of a like a hum of energy. And at that point, it's almost like it would be difficult to stop this process even if you wanted to. And I think of that as I'm going down the opposite side of the hill and I've picked up this momentum, and now it's difficult to stop. But until you reach that point, um, and until you get to that point a few times, you probably won't even know where it is that it's difficult to stop. But there's been a few times where I've purposely tried to pull myself out of it, wondering if I could. And there is a point where it becomes difficult, where it's a real effort to actually pull yourself out of it. So these vibrations build in frequency, the sound builds in frequency, as now it's a hum, the vibrations are much more smooth. And at that point, and this again is just me, and I haven't read any other accounts of this happening, but for me at this point, I can see through my eyelids, I can see through my sleep mask, and I can see the room around me. So now in the physical world, it's pitch black. No way I could see anything, let alone because my eyes are covered with a black sleeping mask. Um, but at this point, I can now see around my room, and the room is just lit by this ambient light that's just radiating off of everything. So here is this is sort of the event that allows me to recognize that it's time for me to sit up or to roll out, and then I can disconnect and I can get out of my body and start my adventure. Now I've heard of people talking about stuck body parts, or only moving your arm, or only being able to move your leg, and I've never personally experienced that, and I sometimes wonder if that's maybe they're trying to move prematurely, and I haven't experienced that because I always wait till this state where I can see through my closed eyelids, and maybe that's the completion of all of it. Maybe I don't know. Not really sure. I'm just thinking that maybe people are trying to get out prematurely is all, and maybe if I did that, I would experience the same thing. I'm not sure. All right, so that's the slow and more controlled method. Uh, Again, just like with everything else here, everything else on this topic, there are some bizarre sensations that you just don't feel anywhere else in life, and they're going to take some time to get used to. In fact, it'll become frustrating at some point because you'll feel like you're making progress, and then you'll hit a new sensation and that you won't be ready for, and it'll scare you, or you'll be excited and you'll ruin it, and you'll think, I was almost there, and then you'll build back up to the point where you can hit that one regularly. And after you hit that sensation, you'll run into a new one, and it'll be, noise in your ears, or it'll be, the vibrational state in general, or something, and it'll every one of these steps just takes more getting used to, and then it just takes practice getting up to these states over and over again until they become commonplace, until you're so accustomed to these sensations that you can just surrender to them completely, and just let them happen as if you're just indifferent to the entire process. So that personally for me took months. It takes a lot of work. So that is the first method. The second method, as I mentioned, is quite a bit more jarring, and unless you've been successful with the first method, I would say it would probably be difficult, but give it a try. I'd be interested in hearing how it works for you. And this is if you want to try to speed up the process. And speeding up the process is not an easy thing. It actually relies completely on creative visualization, specifically creative visualization that induces a feeling of movement. So you've probably heard of the rope technique, and I'm convinced that the rope technique itself, the idea of climbing a rope, is not in itself what makes this process work. What I believe to be the case, based on everything else I've tried, is that it's actually the feeling of movement as you pull yourself upward up this rope that is actually what causes the sensations and causes this process to build. So I have tried the rope technique. I haven't had any success with that. I get some minor sensations here and there, but nothing that's really led to anything. I tried the hammock technique where you rock back and forth in an imaginary hammock. Again, nothing really incredible. I actually saw a YouTube video where they asked a monk about astral projection and his thoughts on it. And he talked about how when he was a kid, he used to imagine himself in a hammock, and it was a very relaxing, calming type of thing for him while he was in meditation. Well, one day he says that he started making this hammock go forward and backward instead of side to side. And at one point, he started making it do loops. And during that looping process, he actually was ejected from his body, just shot out of his body. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I've never actually tried doing loops before. So I tried that. I tried with the hammock method that he talked about. Um, and it wasn't easy. And I think that the reason behind that is I have never been in a hammock that goes like this. And I've got a feeling very few people have been in a hammock that goes like that. So it's very difficult to imagine the movement or the sensation that your body feels during that movement. Now, as I'm talking about this, I should emphasize it's not the visual aspect of this that makes it work. It's the visualized feeling of movement that you feel. So while the sight aspect of it and seeing pictures in your head is, that's a good start, really what will make this work is the imagined feeling of movement. So the sensation in your stomach, the feeling of wind in your face, the feeling of, uh, whatever you're holding on to, if it's the rope or whatever, it's the feeling type aspect of this, the generated movement feeling that will make this work. All right, so the hammock technique, I tried it. It was difficult, but what I found is that on the way back down, as I'm upside down in my imagination and coming down the opposite side, about to go back upside up again, there was a point right about here where I felt this strange twinge in my head, almost like almost like that pulsating static that I'm used to feeling when I let this process go gradually. It was just a very brief little twinge in my head that the energetic type pulses usually produce. And I thought, well, that's a familiar sensation. Maybe I'm onto something. So I played with it a little bit more. I just couldn't get it to be successful for me. And again, I think it's because I've never gone in a hammock round and round and round. So I thought, well, what else have I done where I have gone around and around? And the obvious answer to that is a roller coaster. There was a roller coaster, specifically one called the Ring of Fire, where that's all it does. It's lots of smaller type carnivals and fairs, and you sit in the car, and all you do is you just go round and round and round. It stops, and then you go back the other direction, and that's the entire ride. So I've been on that many times as a kid, and then as I grew up, and that personally is a much, much easier thing for me to imagine. I can imagine the rough vibration of the car against the tracks. I can imagine the wind in my face. I can imagine that falling sensation in my stomach as I'm coming down because it's something I've experienced many times. So that was a much easier place to start. So what I did is I found a video on YouTube where somebody had recorded a first-person point of view riding the Ring of Fire. And I basically just sat there with my phone like this and I just watched that thing for like an hour over and over again, just looped that video, memorizing all of the scenery around the roller coaster, try to remember that feeling, try to remember those sensations. And then I went to bed that night and I gave it a try and used all the same scenery from the video as for the visual aspect of it because that was an easy thing to visualize since I had just been watching it over and over again for the past hour. And then my previous experience with that helped me visualize the actual feeling of the movement. So it was the same thing. As soon as I got to this downward position right back here, I felt this little twinge in my head. Only this time I was able to keep it going. And every time I would get to that point, right about here, there'd be another twinge and it would get stronger and stronger. A little bit different than the rushes of energy, but the same kind of sensation in my head. And at that point, something very alarming and jarring happened. I completely bypassed all of the pulsating static, completely bypassed all this build-up process, and I went from these little twinges of energy in the back of my head to roaring, rushing jet engine in my ear, massive vibrations all at once, and then almost immediately ejected out of my body. Felt like I'm flying through the air. Everything is black with little pulses of white light flying at me, and I just landed somewhere I didn't recognize. It looked like the physical world, but these are places that I've never been before. And this happens every time I do this. It's almost as if this momentum that you built up using this visualized technique just sort of continues on and takes on its own life and just shoots you right out. So that, as I mentioned, is a little harder because it's well, for one thing, you don't have to, I guess, suppose you don't have to get used to these sensations long term. You just have to endure them and stay calm during the sensations during a very brief period of time as you're ejected out. But the actual visualization piece of it really took some practice. So those are the two different methods. The one method I always end up in my room. The other method I end up shooting off to some unknown location. I'd say both of them are definitely worth a try. I'd be interested in hearing how you fare on either one of those, or hearing any feedback where you get stuck if you do run into any types of scenarios that you're having problems with. So those are the two different type scenarios where I'm able to actually make progress from that void type state. So I think that wraps up this particular technique. This is the direct technique. Again, no breaking consciousness from beginning to end. You put your body to sleep, you enter the void, and then you do one of these two techniques. Either just lay there and let the process proceed on its own, remaining completely calm and just turning your attention inward. Or number two, focus on a technique that just produces a feeling of movement. Movement really seems to be the key here. So there's a lot of different techniques out there, but really the crutch, the basis of all of these just appears to be movement, whether it's floating above your body, whether it's climbing a rope. Movement, I believe, to be the key. So I hope that hopefully that's helpful for you guys. Please feel free to leave comments, ask questions as always, and I'll be happy to answer them in subsequent videos. And I look forward to hearing your feedback on this. Let me know how it goes. Thanks, guys. Talk to you later.